G'day everyone. Welcome to the Outback Packers podcast, the podcast where two mates from all the way across the world have a yarn talking Packers football and the green and gold. I'm Nick Gregory, joined by my co-host Iowa Joe, as always. Today welcoming me on the wonderful writer for Dairyland Express and the Packers Wire, Paul Bretl. Paul, it's lovely to have you on. Again, you're just one of these guys I always see posting things and writing things, and I always read your stuff and kind of, I'm always in the loop with what's going on, and it's really, really nice to finally meet you and, get to talk to you in real life.
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate the kind words and thank you guys for having me. I'm excited to talk about training camp here today. It's a different vibe around the team, but there's excitement that comes around with that as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and it's had me perked up. My phone right now is almost dead because I spent most of the day scrolling through reading all the training camp updates and all that stuff. So it used to be that I would be up there at this time, but I haven't done that in a bit. So yeah, it's fun and it's great to have you on, Paul, because I know you're right there amongst everything. So uh you've got a bird's eye view on all of it. And I did scroll through your one of your articles earlier, so I'm excited to get to talking about that too.
Yeah, absolutely. This is obviously I love anytime there's Packers football, but I do really enjoy the training camp preseason part of it as well. Just really diving into the entire roster and just so much potential and opportunity at this time of the year.
For sure.
Awesome. So going into training camp, obviously, we're not reading too much into what's happening, but, there is still things that we can learn, things that we can see quite clearly. What are some kind of just general takeaways that you guys have just from what you've seen?
Can start on the offensive side of the ball. Obviously, there's a ton of inexperience, at receiver, at tight end, but I think what's exciting about that group is the speed and versatility that they have and just the potential that comes with that. Obviously speed, can lead to big playability, but specifically the versatility, the tight end unit can play, Luke Musgrave, we're going to see him in line, in the slot, out wide even, Robert Tonyan, 20% of his snaps came out wide last season. Luke Musgrave's absolutely going to see some snaps there. Just about all the receivers, they can play from the slot, they can play from the boundary. And when you have that ability, that mixture of players, what it does is we hear Matt LaFleur often talk about the illusion of complexity, keeping defenses guessing, keeping them off balance, because it's going to allow the Packers to run a variety of plays from just a few personnel packages. And that creates mismatches with the defense, especially when you're utilizing motion. I think it was Tuesday's practice, that video of the love throw to Christian Watson, just that 60-yarder downfield. In part, that play was set up initially because of motion. They moved Watson across the formation. He found a favorable matchup going up against Innis Gaines. And yeah, that's one that Watson should win most or all of the time. And so that's a little glimpse into what we can expect from this unit. Again, Matt LaFleur has talked about how Christian Watson is one of the more intelligent football players he's been around. He's known for his speed, his big playability, but we're going to see him in the slot. We're going to see him running a variety of routes, making plays at different levels of the field. Jaden Reed, someone who can line up inside and out as well. Romeo Doubs is just a really, really refined route runner, can win that way. So again, you add all those pieces together and, it hopefully helps take some of the playmaking burden off of Jordan Love, because the scheme, the mismatches are doing a little bit of the heavy lifting to hopefully help create some, again, relatively easier reads, easier throws for him and this offense to take advantage of.
Yeah, it's interesting that you're talking about the motion, because we heard for years how, Aaron didn't like motion. So it's good to see that they're finally getting to incorporate that, because they have the guys to do it. Jaden Reed, a guy that you mentioned in your article earlier that's having a good camp that, obviously is my guy, Tyler
Yeah.
Goodson.
Mm.
He's been doing well in the motion stuff. I think some guys have been, or some of the people on Twitter have maybe thought he could be the Tyler Irvin role that we had a few years ago. So the one question I have for you from being up there, we all heard that, Luke Musgrave had a little bit of an issue blocking the first practice. Has he seemed to progress with it, or is there kind of something that they should, maybe he needs to work it out, or should we just wait till, the first game to really have any kind of concern with it?
Yeah, I think it's going to be and something we're just going to continue to keep our eyes on. It's going to be ever evolving. I don't think it's going to go from, obviously we hope to see progression, but I don't think it's going to be something that he's navigating the entire season. Matt LaFleur, and we all know talked about the jump from college to the NFL, 4 tight ends. In the locker room after last week's practice, asked Luke Musgrave, about that jump and what is, one of the more challenging parts of it. And he said it's blocking. And so that's just going to be something that he's going to have to navigate as the season goes on. Where we're really obviously going to notice him is in the passing game. But to pivot a little bit, but stick into the blocking part of it, I think that that's also going to be why Tyler Davis carves out a role within this offense. He's held up very well, specifically as a blocker, and as scrolling our Twitter feeds, that's not going to be something that jumps out, or because he's not running, he's not being asked to run, a ton of routes. You have Luke Musgrave, you have Tucker Kraft. That's what they're going to do. But he's holding up well. There's a couple reps that I have, coming to mind right now where he's matched up against Lucas Van Ness and is able to hold his own in that capacity. So when you have such a young tight end room where, again, there's a transition, especially with the blocking aspect of it, and you have Tyler Davis, who, if he can continue to perform at the level that he has so far in that blocking capacity, he's absolutely going to carve out a role within this offense, especially with just how important that element is to making everything else work.
Yeah, wow, that's a good answer. Something I think is I think that is like really promising to see. Is like just the kind of like you mentioned at the start there. It's like the abundance of weapons that Matt LaFleur has to work with now. It really felt like at some points last season, and especially with injuries, that there was just really no one to kind of execute what he wanted to. I mean, we were running end arounds with Alan Lazard, and now we have Tyler Goodson, Jaden Reed, Christian Watson. Maybe even try and get Wicks in there occasionally. Like, there's just so much more to work with, so much more explosiveness. And yeah, to touch on the blocking thing as well, I think Musgrave is a guy who has all those physical tools. I think the dream projection is something like Travis Kelce, where he's like blocking isn't his strength, but he can do it. And like for me, it comes down to like if Matt LaFleur could get Robert Tonyan and Jimmy Graham to become serviceable blockers. With a guy who's young and probably a bit more willing to block, like Musgrave, I have full faith that he'll be fine.
Yeah, after the draft, Brian Gutekunst said, in regards to Musgrave, they view him as being, an all-around tight end. It's going to take some time to get to that capacity. And when you have that ability within the offense, and he said the same thing about Tucker Kraft too, bringing that ability, it just adds so much unpredictability to the offense. Because if we look at last year's tight end room, while Mercedes Lewis was heck of a blocker, super reliable in that capacity, Robert Tonyan, super reliable as a pass catcher. When they were on the field, you kind of had an idea of what their roles were going to be. Not that Big Dog didn't, run some routes, not that Tonyan wasn't asked to block, but you kind of knew, all right, he's doing this, he's doing that. If you can get that all-encompassing tight end who can hold up as a run blocker, impact the passing game in terms of being the defense pre-snap, again, plays into that illusion of complexity. As the play caller, Matt LaFleur can do a lot more in terms of what he's asking these guys to do, keeps defenses off balance, adds, again, that unpredictability that I mentioned. And again, hopefully takes some of that playmaking burden, off of the quarterback position.
For sure. And that's what I was kind of getting to was, if everybody scouts the Packers and realizes Musgrave's not going to block, so the only time that they're going to trot him out there is to run routes, then it's at least a little easier to scheme. So if we can see his progression go to be even serviceable, I'm not saying he's to go out there and be a big dog, right? There's no doubt about it. There's only one big dog, and if they wanted him, they were going to keep him. But at least enough that he's not going to get his running back or Jordan Love killed when they're running that type of play. But it's great that we have the two playmakers. I know there's even been hype with DeGuara in his role. Tyler Davis, I know they're trying. His blocking stuff is great, but Nick can attest to my disdain for Tyler Davis for the longest time, just because it seemed like all he was doing was taking up a roster spot. But I've said for the longest time that this year is an interesting year, and it's got me more excited than it has for a long time. And these young guys are really, really putting it in there. Now, something that I saw on some clips earlier, I guess they had that. I think it's Henry. I know the last name is Pearson because we have the same last name. So, but he's been He was a tight end, but they're playing him strictly as a fullback now. Is he going to be competition for DeGuara, or is this something that there may be finally a spot for a fullback that we haven't had since Danny Vitale in 2019?
If I had to guess, Pearson's ceiling this year is the practice squad, and potentially as a DeGuara backup, maybe if he were to get injured. When they're doing individual drills, the specific position groups, DeGuara and Henry are even separated from the tight ends, working through a lot of blocking out of the backfield work with their position coach, and then they go back and continue to work with the tight ends with inline blocking and pass catching and all of that stuff. So that's the capacity that I see him being in. DeGuara, expect him to have more opportunities this season, in part just because of the makeup of the tight end room. But he's entering his, I believe it's fourth season now. He, knows the Matt LaFleur offense, and that's just a tough ask to have a rookie come in, in a role where there's a ton of responsibilities. I mean, we talk about the tight end, the H-back has a ton too. So that's the kind of where I see Pearson falling. Practice squad is the ceiling, and, at least could be some insurance for if DeGuara were to get injured. But even at that point, I'm not sure if we would have to see more to even determine if they would feel comfortable bringing him up in that capacity.
I just thought it was kind of funny that they had the video of him being the lone player at doing position drills, and it was really weird. But I got a chuckle out of it. So, and like I said, I got a soft spot because we do share. I don't know if it's a relation or not, but we do share the same last name.
So something I want to ask about here now, guys, moving away from the offense. What do you think about this defense? I mean, they've won every single competitive period at the end of every practice besides today. Like it just seems like they're kind of running with a lot of confidence. Jair is talking a lot about, having a bit more trust in kind of the play call, and, not just kind of working together more than trying to work individually. And, they do seem like they have kind of regained some of that confidence after, a disappointing 2022 season. Are there any players that have really stuck out for you? Obviously TJ Slayton is kind of poised to be a starter this year. What comes to mind for you with defense in mind?
Yeah, so the success for this defense, the opportunity for them to bounce back, it starts with the interior defensive line and stopping the run. There's a stat from last season I feel just kind of encapsulates the Packers' run defense performance. They were the 8th best on third downs in terms of getting off the field, which when I first saw that stat, I'll be honest, I didn't think it was going to be that high. But the other side of that coin is they faced the fewest third downs per game in the NFL. So how does that correlate to the run? when they're on third downs, good chance that they had the offense in third and long situations. That's where this defense thrives. Brian Gutekunst said they have a ton of pass rush options. Those guys can pin their ears back. They can get after the quarterback. They have playmaking guys in the secondary. Obviously, that's advantageous for them. On the flip side, they faced the fewest third downs per game because teams weren't getting there. They were moving the chains on first down. They were moving the chains on second down. And a lot of that starts with giving up chunk run plays that puts them in second and shorts, opens up the playbook for the entire offense. Defense is now on its heels. Offense is the one dictating everything. So if this team is defense specifically is going to bounce back, that's where it starts. And it's going to take the entire front seven. You know, obviously the interior guys are a key part of that. They're the front line, but it's the edge rushers. They, as a group, have to be better at setting the edge. Linebackers have to be better at filling the gaps. Overall, the tackling has to improve. So to me, I've been watching the interior defensive line a lot for that reason. And also tight end and receiver are getting a ton of attention, but that's a super young room as well. Take Kenny Clark out of the equation. TJ Slayton's played fewer than 600 snaps. Devontae Wyatt's played fewer than 250. No one else on the roster has any NFL snaps. It's super young. But what I will say in terms of them standing out, they look so much faster than I think what we're used to seeing from a Packers defensive line. Devontae Wyatt's getting more snaps. Kobe Wooden tested incredibly well athletically. Carl Brooks, someone else who brings some of that, burst to the interior defensive line. Whether it's, getting push and penetrating into the backfield, flowing sideline to sideline when the ball carriers move in that direction, this group just looks so much faster. And if you don't mind, I'm going to go off on a little side tangent here.
Go ahead.
The Play Callers podcast, the Play Callers podcast that was presented by The Athletic, where it was focused on, Kyle Shanahan, Sean McVay, Matt LaFleur, that coaching tree. They also interviewed Brandon Staley, the Los Angeles Chargers head coach. And because the Vic Fangio defensive scheme is kind of taken over the NFL a little bit, similar to kind of what Shanahan and McVay's is. And of course, Joe Barry was brought to Green Bay by Matt LaFleur to run a version of that defense. So they're interviewing Brandon Staley. He's talking about the type of interior defensive lineman he needs. And two of the things that he mentioned were versatility, which this group very much has. Wooden, Brooks, both played up and down the line in college. Obviously, we know Kenny Clark can do that as well. And then speed. They're looking for more gap penetrators rather than the Tyler Lancasters, the Dean Lowrys that we've seen in Green Bay that are more, doing the dirty work, space occupiers, just clogging up the middle. And so as we look at the moves that Brian Gutekunst has made over the last 2 years, Wooden, Brooks, bringing in Devontae Wyatt as well, it feels like there's been a real focus shift in terms of bringing in that specific type of interior defender. Now, to say all that, I have no clue what this unit's going to do this year, how they're going to perform. I'm in very much, hey, you got to show me right now for not just the defensive front, but this defense as a whole. But that's the biggest observation I've had from that unit is the speed and the versatility is absolutely showing up in training camp. And hopefully it translates into the regular season. Because like I said, at the start of this entire thing, it starts with stopping the run.
The one name that I was surprised that Coach LaFleur brought up was Jonathan Ford. He said that he looks like he's, what was the exact quote? Something like,
upped his game.
Upped his game. That's it.
Yeah.
And, I know a lot of people are down on him and he really didn't play any last year, but I was kind of interested in him coming out because he looked like he had potential. Sorry, I'm messing with my dust cover. It keeps moving on me. And I really haven't heard it. It was kind of weird hearing LaFleur say that because I really hadn't heard anything from anybody, any of the beat writers or that talking about him during any of the practices. So, he must be doing something right if even the head coach is coming out and saying, hey, he's upped his game. He looks like he's doing something.
Yeah, and I think a part of that too is it was unprompted. It's not like he was specifically asked about Jonathan Ford and gave that answer. LaFleur was actually asked about the center position and Josh Myers, and then just took it in a completely different direction and started talking about the interior defensive line and how they've played well at the start of training camp here. And Ford has been with a lot of times the second unit, the uh, Wyatt, Slayton, Clark. They're the big three that they're going to lean on. Kobe Wooden's the fourth guy in the rotation. Ford's playing for the sixth spot on this team. And also, he's 6'5", he's 338. Like, his role on this team is going to be as a run defender. And at times, those guys just, that role and what you're asked to do, that just always isn't going to leap out off of the screen or the stat sheet, whatever you're looking at. So I think all that's playing into why we haven't heard as much about him up to this point, but his path to the roster is clear. Like, it is as the secondary nose tackle option to TJ Slayton. And again, I'm going to reference that Brian Gutekunst quote from earlier. They have guys who can get after the quarterback. They have plenty of those, but who can be those guys to step up against the run? Obviously, it's Slayton. Clark is going to be relied on because he's Kenny Clark and he's just that good, but Clark can't play 100% of the run snaps and 100% of the pass rush snaps. So if you want him on the field for run defense, he's not on the field for pass rush and vice versa. These other guys need to step up. And for Ford, that's going to be his path to his team. If he can prove to be someone who, again, he's not going to be a high usage guy, but if he can, give you 10, 12 quality snaps a game as a run defender, that's going to be how he can earn a spot as the sixth interior defensive lineman on this roster.
To kind of stick with the defense, and maybe you can give an answer and maybe you can't, but I saw that Razul got a little heated today. Do we know what that was over, or is that still kind of a team secret?
He was just very enthused about the team drill. I don't think that there was anything taking place. He was just out there bringing the energy, bringing the juice, and
Okay.
I think that's that's exciting to see this time of the year from
It's amazing. I know the way they were putting it, he was kind of saying some things that maybe he shouldn't have been saying, to the point where it got Tucker Kraft to quote Step Brothers. And so, and I know Matt Schneidman kind of, I don't know if you want to call it clickbaity or not, but he said, I'll try to get an answer from Razul, but I'm not going to say what he said on Twitter. But if he'll say it to me in the locker room, I'll put the quote out there.
Yeah, what I'll say, Razul, Jair, Keyshawn Nixon, like that cornerback room, they've all been playing extremely well at the start of camp here as well. And even the secondary options, Corey Ballantyne, Carrington Valentine as the boundary cornerbacks with the second defense. Like, this cornerback room has looked really, really good. I know it's not, breaking news to sit here and say that Jair Alexander's playing at a high level, but he's really playing at a high level right now. Like, the ball's either not going his direction or, a lot of times he is absolutely all over it. So, in addition to just monitoring the interior defensive line play, the cornerback room to me has leaped off the practice field as well, just because of the overall high level of play that we're seeing from that group.
Something I kind of want to ask about here, because it seems like it's a real gray area, is what's happening with their safety room. We've kind of seen Jonathan Owens almost in a starter role. Anthony Johnson, of course, is getting some snaps in there. We're seeing like Ennis Gaines playing more as well. Like, what are you seeing like coming from that area of the backfield there? Like, has like has two siders really like kind of defined themselves yet, or is it still pretty open?
Yeah, it feels like they're, in terms of who is going to make the team, it feels like there's been a separation in that regard, and I'll touch on that more in a second. In terms of who's the starting, who's the second unit, it felt like we were kind of seeing that defined as well, but that was thrown off a bit recently. So for going back to OTAs, it's been Darnell Savage and Rudy Ford as the starters. And I don't think that's terribly surprising to anyone. But now that we're getting, a little deeper into training camp, new guys like Tavarius Moore, Jonathan Owens getting more comfortable with the defensive scheme. We saw Jonathan Owens on Thursday lining up next to Rudy Ford with the starters. And he and Tavarius Moore have primarily been with the second defense. And then there's Dallin Levitt, who's a core special teams player. He spent his entire career under Rich Bisaccia, either in Green Bay or in Las Vegas. And there's at least one instance, I think there may be even two last season I can think of, where Aaron Rodgers specifically mentioned Levitt in terms of just his locker room presence, the leadership aspect that he brings. And with a young team, I mean, I think that can be important to have. So I'm just having a hard time envisioning a Packers 53 without Levitt. So right there, everyone that I just mentioned is already 5 safeties. I looked this up. The last time they kept 6 safeties was 2016. So it's not exactly something that I'm banking on at this point. Not to say that it can't happen, but very uncommon as well. And so that means, at least based off who we've seen with the first, second team defenses, Levitt's role in special teams, Ennis Gaines and Anthony Johnson, that leaves them off the roster at this time. And I know there's a lot of excitement around Anthony Johnson. I think he's been compared a little bit in terms of play style to filling an Adrian Amos-like role, I believe I saw someone say. And you see that. There was one rep where, he's at deep safety, identifies the run is taking place, fires up to the line of scrimmage, fills the gap, stops the run. Like, it was a terrific play, but he's been with the third defense for going back to offseason programs. And I don't think we should be terribly surprised by that, because he's not only making the jump from college to the NFL. This is only his second year at safety. He spent 4 years as a cornerback at Iowa State. So he's still learning a relatively new position for him. Now, when it comes to Ennis Gaines, I don't know what his path to the roster looks like. We just talked about the cornerback room that's playing really well and is crowded. Safety room's crowded, but he's gotten some snaps with the second team defense playing in the slot. And when he played the final 3 games of last season, that's where he spent his time. I think he had 31, 32 slot snaps. And so as we look at the Packers cornerback room and how it's constructed, Keyshawn Nixon's the slot guy right now, but who else within that room is like a true slot cornerback? Razul, Stokes, Valentine, their boundary. Jair, you just want him wherever the best guy is. So that's a potential role he could carve out as the backup slot. He was also a contributor on special teams last season. He started off the year on the practice squad, so he ranked 19th on the Packers in special team snaps, but he ranked 6th on the team in solo tackles, showing some of that playmaking ability. So you couple those two things together, and you can see someone who can be a contributor, who can, carve out a role on this defense. But again, going back to the overall cornerback room, the overall safety room, from a numbers standpoint, that's where we just need to see more take place. We need to get to the preseason games. We need to see, who's where in terms of first unit, second unit, how are guys performing. But right now, in a roundabout way, that's how I feel the safety position stands right now. Those 5 that I mentioned, Savage, Ford, Owens, Moore, Levitt, really feel like that could be the week 1 position group for at safety. And then right now, Matt LaFleur said too, they're going to continue to rotate guys. He said that, he told us that on Saturday. So the fact that Owens was in there with Ford, it's too early to sit here and say, oh, he's taken over Savage's spot. I think they're just seeing, because there's so much unknown. They're just giving everyone an opportunity, and they're seeing what they can do.
Yeah. That's what it seemed like to me, but obviously I'm not up there to, see the groups, but it just seemed like they were trying to pair everybody together to see how well they work together with each other. And, as much as I hate to say it, but I am kind of rooting for Anthony Johnson Jr. Just, I have kind of a little story from when I was up there in June with him, where I had my stuff to get autographs, and he come out, and I said, I asked him if he'd sign my picture, and he said, yeah. Well, I always wear an Iowa Hawkeye hat when I'm up there. And he walked away, and then like 2 seconds later, you could see it like click in his head, and he comes back. I didn't even recognize that. I wouldn't even have signed for you if I saw that hat on your head. So, but like you said, Paul, he's only been a safety for a short amount of time, but he's got such an athletic, ability to him.
Mhm.
I think they're just gonna slow roll him until they have to use him because and I don't know how he doesn't make the roster because I don't think they're gonna be able unless something major happens, I don't know if he'd be able to uh, skim through to the practice squad. But it's still too early.
Mhm.
Anything could happen. But it's kind of weird to say that with the doom and gloom we've had out of the safety position or the way people talk about the safety position, that we're already, I'm already talking about how maybe we're not even going to get one or two of them back onto the practice squad. But
Yeah,
no, go
I was
ahead.
just I was just gonna say, like, we know that the Packers prefer, if they can, especially those or for those back end roster spots, to keep the guys that they drafted. And I think Jonathan Ford last year is just a prime example of that. 7th round pick, the outside looking in. And I think a lot agree. It felt like Jack Heflin, even Chris Slayton, may have outplayed Ford during the preseason, but they gave Ford the roster spot, even though I think he was inactive all 17 games on game day. But the Packers had 13 draft picks this year. Like, yeah, they've had roster turnover. It's a young team, but fitting 13 draft picks onto the roster, it's not easy. Not to say they can't do it or won't do it, but
Right.
I think in looking at how they've operated in the past in terms of squeezing, and this isn't just an Anthony, in reference to Anthony Johnson, but the late round picks as a whole, in looking back at how they've squeezed those guys on the roster, it's just a lot more difficult this year just because of the sheer number of draft picks that they had.
Right. But speaking of draft picks, we probably should get into this one a little bit.
Mm.
Anders, I guess it's Anders Carlson. Um, so far he's not looking amazing. He's not been horrible, but I guess it came out, was it yesterday or today, that they hadn't been keeping track of it, but it seemed like he was doing well when Pat O'Donnell's holding compared to when that I can't think of his first name, but Whelan was holding.
Mhm.
So is that, I know it just came out. So is that something you've noticed when you've been there, or do we need to kind of, and obviously they're going to just go with the flow and let the guy kick, and unless he double doinks every game of the year, I don't think that they're going to move on from him because this is a Bisaccia guy. So I mean, what is your thoughts on Anders?
Yeah, you're right. He's a Bisaccia guy. Like, I think it was Rich himself said that he met with him one on one, like flew down to Auburn prior to the draft. Obviously worked with his brother Daniel, and Brian Gutekunst said the familiarity that Rich has with Anders played a big role in them drafting him. The Packers knew that there were going to be days like this, like last Saturday where he goes 1 for 6. You got a rookie kicker coming in. He's the only one in camp. You knew that this was going to happen, and they were obviously aware of that. And based on Goody's comments, they're going to give him time. They're going to give him time, over the coming weeks to see if he can be the guy come training or come regular season that they can rely on. Because Goody said, not just referring to Carlson, but all the young guys, they need reps right now, and that's a big reason why there's not a second kicker in camp to challenge them, because the opportunities to kick field goals in that team setting in the practice field, it's so limited. He's only getting up in that environment. Obviously, he's getting more up, throughout the day, but in that specific window, he's only getting up 6 kicks. So now if you got another kicker in there, maybe it's only 3 kicks or maybe it's 6, but then he's not the next day. So they're going to give him that opportunity to go and prove that he can be the guy. And I'm going to pivot to punter real quick, because Daniel Whelan, he's got a heck of a
There
leg.
you
He really does. But there's so much more that's going to come with this role. Like, a big reason that they signed Pat O'Donnell a year ago was because of his ability as a holder. Corey Bajorquez, the punter from 2021, he had a big leg too, but was inconsistent in the holding part of it. So now you got a rookie kicker, you got a rookie punter, like that may not end well. And so I think that's something we just have to keep in mind too, rather than looking at, Whelan's bombing the ball 55 yards, his hang time's 4.6 seconds. Like, that's great. But how's he doing in that capacity? Because chances are this is a Packers offense, at least early on, as they try to figure things out, situationally in the red zone, on third downs, may struggle. It's going to put points at a premium. It might mean more field goal attempts when they cross midfield versus being able to punch it into the end zone. Not to say that field goals, extra points don't matter. They always matter. But if you're not putting up a ton of points, they matter even more. And so being able to capitalize on that is going to be incredibly important.
Another thing about Anders, I don't know if you would know or not, does he still have the brace on his plant leg, or was that just the last year of college that he had it?
He doesn't right now, and I guess I'm not certain, but part of me thinks he didn't even play that full season at Auburn with the brace on either.
Okay.
But no, he doesn't have it right now.
Well, I was just wondering because that could be something that's factoring into it too, where he finally got used to wearing the brace, and now he's trying to go back the other way of not wearing the brace. But if he hasn't had it for a while, then that's probably not it.
And it's not like, and I mean, part of again, from the outside looking in, part of the head scratching part about the pick was he wasn't this guy that had this pristine, make percentage coming out of Auburn. I think he had 71 of his career attempts. So the fact that he's, missing some kicks right now, it at least mirrors what he did in school. But again, there's the familiarity. Bisaccia has talked about in his words, he said the mental makeup that Carlson has. He's got a big leg. Like that's not the issue. It's just about harnessing that. And Bisaccia also talked about his just big game experience in college, the bowl games Auburn was in, competing in the SEC every week. Like those are some of the intangibles that, stood out to them and gave them the confidence to make that pick.
It's really interesting that point you made about the holding because, as you said with Bojorquez, he kind of struggled with that, right?
Mm-hmm.
And J.K. Scott was almost the exact opposite, where he struggled with the punting, but he was a fantastic holder, and we saw him save so many errant passes from long snappers. It's really interesting, and I guess like you guys have said, like we kind of knew this was going to be a thing, and a lot of kickers, sometimes it just takes a while for them to click, whether it's getting comfortable or they change something about their actual motion. I think like Youngwei Koo is a perfect example. He was like pretty terrible his first year. And with the Falcons now, he's actually quite solid. So, hopefully we'll see that kind of from Carlson. But yeah, definitely up and down so far. Mm-hmm. Something I've been very interested in that's come out more today is this kind of the O-line battle, right? I mean, I think they have decided pretty much, as far as we can tell, that Zach Tom is going to be a starter somewhere on this line, whether it's at center or tackle. Mm-hmm. Remains to be seen, but that battle is just so fascinating to me. And honestly, I didn't think that they had the guts to really address it like this in training camp. The fact that the Matt LaFleur had that quote today about Josh Myers that he's good, but they need consistency. I think that's really, really telling, and I think a lot of us kind of knew that, right? But it's always kind of surprising to hear a coach say that so bluntly. Mm-hmm. This battle, where are you at? What have you seen? What do you personally think? And what do you expect from the guys even behind in depth, like Sean Ryan, who's made a really fantastic recovery?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So Matt LaFleur said today, like you said, it's about consistency, and I think we see that. When Myers puts it together, he performs well, but it's just the ups and downs. And I think where Zach Tom ends up playing, because offensive line play, it's the sum of the parts over the individual. A really, really good left side, but a struggling right side, the collective unit isn't going to perform very well. So in determining where he's going to be, where's the biggest talent gap? Is it between him and Myers at center or him and Nyman at right tackle? And at least based on what I've seen up to this point, Tuesday was Tom's first time taking snaps at center with the starters. And so I think, at least for me, there needs to be a larger sample size, but he's like you said, Nick, he's absolutely one of the five, like without question. And one other thing, I did an article writing about kind of some standout performers here in training camp, and I threw Tom on the list because I think as Packer fans, we've seen Elton Jenkins move around. We're now seeing Zach Tom move around, but like that's not normal. It's not normal especially to go from the interior to tackle, and then the next drill you're back to playing center and do it all at a high level. So I wanted to make sure I wrote in Zach Tom in that article because it's really impressive what he's doing, and he's absolutely holding his own. And he told us in the locker room on Tuesday after that practice that he's put on 15 to 20 pounds over the offseason with the intention of, I'm doing this to be better in the run game. So again, still to be determined where he's going to fall. If I were making up the offensive line right now, based on what I've seen, I think I would put him at center and Nyman at right tackle. But again, a lot to be determined. As far as the secondary or the second team offensive line, it's been pretty well set. Your left tackle's been Rasheed Walker. Right tackle's been Caleb Jones. Up until Jake Hansen got injured, he had been at center. And then now it's kind of been either Myers or Tom, depending on who's not with the ones. And then the guards have been Royce Newman and Sean Ryan. And like you referenced, Nick, Sean Ryan in the individual drills, the one-on-one against the interior defenders, has done really, really well. So that group right now seems set. So that gives them 10 offensive linemen right there. The 6 who are battling for the 5 spots, and then you got Jones, Walker, Ryan, Newman as the next 4. Like that could be the Packers, roster of offensive linemen come week 1.
Yeah, I mean, what a privilege to have so much versatility in this group. I mean, between Zach Tom, Elton Jenkins, Yosh Nyman, Sean Ryan, Royce Newman, these guys can play all over the line, even if just at guard. Having guys who can legitimately flip and stay, solid, consistent. That's such a privilege. And Zach Tom, who's fighting for 2 different starting spots, is just absolutely crazy as a 5th round, second year player on an O-line that has so many good players already. This is another classic example of how the Packers get these guys in.
Yeah, it's very good, and something to watch just on the back end is those developmental tackles, Jones and Walker, because this is a position of depth for Green Bay right now. They got a lot of options at offensive tackle, but 2024 there could be some definite question marks. This might be Bakhtiari's last year. Yosh Nyman's an unrestricted free agent in 2024. The good news, I guess, is that the offensive tackle class next year is supposedly supposed to be really, really good. But we could see Walker or we could see Jones with the opportunity to start next year. I don't think either of them are going to be handed that by any means, but they could be competing for starting time next summer. And both of them are on a similar timeline to Yosh Nyman. Nyman was an undrafted rookie in 2019. His first significant snaps came in 2021. It was that San Francisco game where Green Bay headed out west early on in the regular season there. These two, 2024, Walker and Jones, it's going to be their 3rd season in the NFL. Walker a 7th round pick, Jones a UDFA. So they seem to be on a similar path. And it definitely feels like, again, based on how the starting and second team units are constructed, that they could have another year on the roster as pretty much developmental players. Like they're not going to be, barring a slew of injuries, they're not going to be needed, this season.
Now, this is a way too early question because we've still got a bunch of training camp left before it. But is there a real possibility that one of either Myers or Nyman is on the trade block by the end of the training camp?
I don't think so. Offensive line depth is so important. And we know the Packers really, really value it. So even if you have one of those guys coming off the bench, for example, as a backup, I think that the Packers would rather have that than whatever draft pick they could get in return. Because just like the defensive line and stopping the run is success for the defense, offensive line is the key to success for the offense. If Love doesn't have time, it's not going to end well. If the run game isn't consistent and they're facing 2nd and longs, 3rd and longs, it's not going to end well. So I just don't see the Packers going that route.
Well, kind of speaking of Love, it's been kind of controversial, so to say, between the personalities on Twitter. You've got one side saying that he's looking tremendous throughout, and then you've at least one specifically saying that he's had one good practice and then one all right practice and then a bunch of practices. So what are we looking at? Are just some of these guys buying into Love already? Or is he actually, I mean, we see the clips and all that and we see the good throws, but is he really looking like he's ready to take on QB1 role?
Yeah, he still definitely needs to be more consistent. Like that day the Christian Watson clip was out there, and even that pass to Jaden Reed that he didn't catch, but was just a beautifully placed ball. Like that same day, he bounced one off of Quay Walker's chest that he wasn't able to come down with. So consistency is absolutely needed. But I think, if you're looking for encouragement, those passes that I just referenced, there was another one where Samori Toure ran a quick out and then an up. And they had been running, the receivers had been running outs all day. And so Rasul Douglas saw the out, got super aggressive, and then Toure turns up field. So he gets a step on Douglas. And Love is about 30 yards downfield. Just drop the ball in there perfectly. If it's too far left, Toure drifts out of bounds. If it's too far right, Savage is coming over, has a chance to break it up. So we see those, wow throws. And I think that shows the ceiling, the potential that's out there for him. When you have a quarterback who can throw guys open, like those plays there, I mean, that can take the offense to a whole nother level versus the pass catchers having to create that separation or the scheme having to create that separation. So again, a lot more consistency is needed, but that shows the potential, the ceiling that's out there for him in that regard. And one other thing I'll add is Matt LaFleur has talked about with Love, it's about the process. That's what they're concerned about right now, more so than the results. And if the process is done consistently and it's done correctly, the results will follow. So what does he mean by that? Getting in and out of the huddle quickly, good base in the pocket, throwing with timing, throwing in rhythm, good mechanics that lead to accurate passes, going through his progressions, good footwork. And I do think that we are seeing more of those parts of the game become a bit more consistent for him, which again should lead to more results for him, on the practice field. And one other thing I'll add is, there have been some drops by these receivers too. So when we see his, numbers at the end of the day that are posted on Twitter, this is a young receiver group. There are drops as well that, don't always tell the whole story either.
Yeah, I think just like you're seeing the kind of progression out of Love, and like obviously there's going to be consistencies. He's just stepping into this role, but like what we've seen so far, I guess it's kind of a little bit par for the course and a little bit of a taste of what potential kind of is there, right? And I guess that's one of the really hard things about Packers camp specifically, is that there really isn't much to like for us to see. Someone like me who's in a different country, or guys who aren't actually there at the practices. There's not much for us to see, so it can be really hard to judge. I think it's kind of interesting as well. Like, it seems like some of the receivers are having trouble with this like catching in general as well, which maybe is part of it. But I think it's still so early to really determine anything about Love. But I mean, yeah, like, what a fascinating situation for us to be able to tune into.
Yeah, there's been, I mean, his performance so far, like just overall 30,000 foot view, like I'm not terribly surprised. Like he's had some really impressive throws. We know he has the arm talent. Like that was one of his strengths coming out of the draft. He's had some interceptions or near interceptions. Like he's a first time starting quarterback. That's going to happen. But what he and the offense are really doing is taking advantage when they do have sustained success. They're doing really well at taking advantage of the middle of the field. And I think that's one element in this offense we're going to see a lot more of. We know Aaron Rodgers preferred the boundaries, but the Shanahan offense, so the Fleur offense, you get the guys in space over the middle, yak potential, big play potential with that. So the offense has done a good job of taking advantage there.
Yeah, absolutely. It's all about, in the system, it's all about, putting the linebackers and the safeties in difficult spots, right? Awesome. That's really cool to hear. So before we finish up here, Paul, is there anything of your own that you want to kind of just talk about, any articles you've written or just like stuff in general you'd like to just talk about here?
We got through all my big stuff. Great questions. I appreciate the opportunity to join you. Follow me on Twitter at Paul_Bretl. You can find my work at Packers Wire, Dairyland Express. Got a YouTube channel as well where a lot of the topics we discussed today, observations from training camp, talk about articles that I've written. Just my name, Paul Bretl.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for coming on, Paul. It was fantastic to talk with you and get so much detail in these responses. As always, guys, you can find us on Twitter, myself at NicholasGRGR, Joe at Iowa_Joe86, the podcast at @Outback_Packers. Make sure you like, share, subscribe, all that good stuff. And until next time, we'll see you later.